right, welcome everybody to our training this morning. I'm so happy that you all were able to hop on and learn more about this really, really important topic within our community, especially here in New Mexico. Today we do have Peggy Bird from the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. And as you know, this training will include an overview of tribal jurisdiction, how to obtain an order of protection on tribal jurisdictions, as well as enforcement of orders of protections, how to access resources for domestic violence survivors outside of tribal jurisdictions. And so it's going to be a really, really amazing topic today. So please feel free to ask your questions, put them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye out on that for Peggy. And for those of you joining us on Facebook, welcome. We're really happy to have you all also join us. Please also feel free to share this within your community. And if you also have any questions, please feel free to place them in the comment box. I'll be also keeping an eye on that. And as you all know, you will get a survey and a certificate, plus this recording as well. We are recording this session, just in case if you all would like to look back on it. You can also find other recordings on our YouTube channel. You can Google NMCADV YouTube. All right, if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. And with that being said, I am going to now turn it over to Dr. Peggy Bird from the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. Thank you so very much for being here with us this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sure you've all received my bio, so I'm not going to spend too much time introducing myself, but I'm so happy to be here with you today. I am from Kiowa Pueblo, and I'm of the Sun Clan, which is why I have a picture of clouds and the sun shining up there in the clouds. We are matriarchal, and that's my primary identity, is being from the Sun Clan. And just to let you know my Indian name, in case any of you are joining us from Kiowa, and maybe you don't know, I'm Yatmoni. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today, and we've got an hour and a half. I'm really happy to be able to spend some time with you this morning. Sometimes a lot of people come up with questions about, well, how do we provide a response to Native people who are experiencing domestic violence? What happens in Indian country? What happens when they come outside and leave their community, and maybe they're in Santa Fe or in Albuquerque or any of the other surrounding communities in Indian country? So I'm presenting to you some information from a legal perspective, since I'm an attorney, and I'm also presenting information to you from my perspective as an advocate. I'm a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I want to clarify something. I am a co-founder of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. I'm not on the board or a staff member, but I am still connected to the coalition and continue to provide support to them. As well, I guess I am a member in a couple of organizations like Tewa Women United, and then also through Nambe Pueblo and their domestic violence program. So let's go ahead and move forward. And as you heard, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. So talking about Indian country. Now, Indian country, some of you may have seen signs when you travel around New Mexico. For example, this is one of the signs where you're entering Zuni land. And some of the signs, if you've traveled up Interstate I-25 or across I-40, you'll see signs that say entering Santo Domingo or entering San Felipe or entering Laguna. You may have seen those signs, or they'll say leaving Santo Domingo. Those show the borders. And as you can see on the map, it shows all of the pueblos, as well as Jicarilla Apache Indian Reservation, Mescalero Apache Indian Reservation, and Navajo Indian Reservation, which is three parts because there's Navajo way up in the corner, the northwest corner of the state. Below that is Rama, which is part of Navajo Nation. And then when you're traveling west on I-40, you may see signs that show Tohajale. That's also part of Navajo Nation. So those are all considered Indian country. And there is a federal definition for Indian country. And this definition came up as the United States became, after it was formed and after it started determining where Indians were going to live and where their lands were defined. And as colonization pushed westward, and as new Indian communities and Indian peoples were, I guess, became defined as Indians, and their lands also became defined, the definition of Indian country as it started out expanded. So it started out first with all lands within the limits of any Indian reservation, because when Indians were taken off of most of them through treaties, they were designated lands to live on that were theirs as Indian reservations. Then there were laws that came to pass, don't recall it, in the 19, there was an allotment act, and some of the lands became allotted. And as they became allotted, especially this affected most of the lands in Oklahoma, they became open to being put into private ownership. But that also changed, and another law was passed which allowed and started protecting those lands. So a lot of those lands, which were called allotments, were placed in trust, in the trust to be held by the United States for Indian ownership. And they were considered to be within the boundaries of an Indian reservation. Also, Indian country includes rights of ways that are running through a reservation. So earlier I showed you that map. We've got I-40 and I-25, and there's also state roads and county roads that run through Indian country. Then Indian country also includes all dependent Indian communities within the borders of the United States. That definition came into place after Pueblo lands were recognized, and Pueblo lands were considered then Indian communities that are within the borders of the United States. So it also includes all Indian allotments and Indian titles to which have not been extinguished, including rights of way running through those allotments and running through those different areas, those rights of ways. And rights of ways also include, for example, another example of a right of way, when railroads came through and were put in place across the country, they had to go to the Indian nation and request a right of way. Say, can I have permission to go through your reservation to build this road or this railroad through your lands? And in those right of way negotiations, usually there were fees paid to the Indian nation. Okay. So we're going to talk about jurisdiction a lot, because jurisdiction has a lot to do with where you get a protection order, or how you provide services, or whose lands you're on, or what laws you look at. So what does it really mean? I tried to make this simple, because jurisdiction is a term that's tossed around a lot. Like, for example, and you've encountered this, somebody comes to you with a protection order they obtained on an Indian nation, and they go to a law enforcement to get it enforced. And maybe the law enforcement who hasn't been trained doesn't understand that they can enforce it. And they say, oh, we don't have jurisdiction to take care of that. So you need to go back to your tribe, which isn't correct. And we'll get to that later. So jurisdiction generally means the authority that a sovereign or government possesses over either a subject or person. So a sovereign can be the state of New Mexico. It can be an Indian nation. I'm from Kiowa Pueblo, so that would be the jurisdiction. I work at Nambe Pueblo, so that would be another jurisdiction. And then jurisdiction also, it's divided into categories. So personal jurisdiction is the authority that a tribe or a state has over the persons living within their boundaries. So for a tribe, it's within the boundaries of their reservation, or over persons who may be crossing the reservation on that right of way we talked about, or persons doing business on the reservation. It also includes this category, which is subject matter jurisdiction. And that's the authority that a sovereign or government has over a subject. For example, maybe they have passed laws or they have codes, and the subject might be divorce, or it might be child custody, or it might be protection orders. And then criminal jurisdiction is the category. This is the authority that a sovereign or government has over crimes committed within their boundaries. For example, crimes committed in Indian country when they're looking at an Indian nation. Under the state, crimes that are committed outside the jurisdiction of Indian country. Civil jurisdiction is the authority that a sovereign or government has over civil matters. And civil matters also are subjects that are not criminal in nature. So jurisdictional issues come up when there's a question about, does this Indian nation or state of New Mexico have authority over that subject or that person? And it also considers the location. Where did the issue arise? Where did this happen? So how is jurisdiction determined? And for Indian nations, we look to federal laws. And I would say even for states, under state law, we look to state laws. What does it say under state law? And as I stated before, boundaries generally and land areas. For example, for Indian nations, our definition comes from Indian country, but it also comes from codes that are in place. Some codes are written. Most of the pueblos do have written codes, but there are some places where we don't have written codes. For example, Kiowa Pueblo doesn't have a written code. Maybe Cochiti might not have a written code. And San Felipe, I think they might have one in place, but we would have to check with them to make sure. But I have an example up here for Jemez Pueblo. When they talk about jurisdiction, they put it under their code section 131, and they listed it as tribal policy. And they said it's their tribal policy that the Pueblo provides to its members and other persons living within the territorial jurisdiction. So when they say a territorial jurisdiction, they are looking at the boundaries. They're looking at the land area of the Pueblo. And they look at the means to address both civil and criminal cases against members and non-tribal members who either because of their residence living there or their presence coming through the jurisdiction or business dealings or their other actions that create significant minimum contacts with the reservation or with the residents of Jemez, or who commit criminal offenses against the Pueblo, or incur civil obligations to persons or entities entitled to the pueblo's protection. So this is how they look at jurisdiction generally. So I talked about personal jurisdiction. I also talked about how it is established over that person or over people doing business within that jurisdiction. Case law has come up that has impacted the federal definition of jurisdiction and federal definitions of Indian country, and also has impacted the way that tribes can assert their jurisdiction over people who come within their boundaries, within their jurisdictions. And within the case law that's come up, there are cases that state that there has to be minimum contacts with the forum, which is usually the government, the place. Did the person have minimum contacts with the tribe? So a person might live outside a reservation, but if they travel through on a highway, which is on that right of way that passes through the reservation, that is enough to establish minimum contacts. So an example of that is a lot of tribes now have civil authority over non-Indians who travel on state roads. For example, Laguna Pueblo, I-40 goes through their reservation. So they can issue civil citations to anyone who violates their civil traffic code because minimum contacts have been established. So we look at subject matter jurisdiction again, and courts have to determine if they have subject matter jurisdiction before they can proceed in a case that's filed there in their court. They have to look whether the code gives them that jurisdiction, whether the code specifically tells them that their case can be heard in that court. Subject matter jurisdiction can also be found by looking at treaties, federal statutes, United States Supreme Court cases, state statutes and cases, and tribal court cases. If there's no subject matter jurisdiction, then the judgment or order issued by the court is void. So lots of times we'll see cases that are filed and then a challenge comes up by the person who is in the case. Maybe it's a criminal case. And then the defendant will say, well, you don't have subject matter jurisdiction over me because it didn't happen and you don't have the authority to bring me into your court. Or in a civil case, there are challenges about subject matter jurisdiction, usually filed. And then the court has to determine, do we have jurisdiction to proceed? Civil jurisdiction, as I talked about, it can be over divorces, custody, protection orders, probate, family cases, children court cases, child support cases, and other cases, civil traffic matters. Criminal jurisdiction, sometimes people get these ones mixed up. These are cases that are brought on behalf of a sovereign or government for violations under a criminal code or criminal laws, for example, in the state. And the cases are filed by either a prosecutor or a police officer if the tribe doesn't have a prosecutor or a district attorney on behalf of the plaintiff. Sometimes when you're working with people who have a case and they're a victim and there's a criminal case filed, and they think the victim will think that they can drop the charges. They can't drop the charges. It is up to the prosecutor or the district attorney or assistant DA or the police officer to make that determination whether or not to dismiss the case. Tribal criminal jurisdiction. So States have criminal jurisdiction over everyone within the state, with some exceptions. And that's being clarified now, which I'm going to explain in a little bit because of a recent Supreme Court case. So within tribes, because of case law that happened, there is a limit to criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. Tribes have no authority to prosecute crimes committed by non-Indians in Indian country, with the exception of crimes that are listed under the reauthorized Violence Against Women Act of this year that was passed recently. It goes into effect and starts pretty soon, October 1st. And tribes also have exclusive jurisdiction to prosecute non-major crimes by Indians against Indians. When I talk about non-major crimes, I will explain that with the next few slides. And then tribes also have concurrent, meaning that they can prosecute crimes that are committed by Indians, as well as crimes that are prosecuted in federal court under Section 1153 of the United States Code, and concurrent with the federal government over crimes committed by Indians against non-Indians under Section 1152. And I'll share this PowerPoint with Teresa so she can send it out to you, so you can have these sections of the code, because sometimes you probably want to look at it again and read it a little bit more. So the Major Crimes Act, this is under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1153. This act came into place as a result of people not being happy earlier. Gosh, I forgot the year it was put in place and enacted into law. This came into place because people saw that what they saw was a crime of a murder being committed in Indian country. Where it was committed, it was handled in a traditional way, where it wasn't considered a murder. It was considered a crime committed against the family. And what had happened was there was a rape that happened, and the person who committed the rape, there were serious consequences for committing rape in Indian country for this tribal nation. And the consequence was loss of life. The family of the woman who was raped was allowed to take the life of the person who committed the rape. But there were also reparations given back to the family of the person who was gave up his life, the family of the person who was taking the life, and the community also provided support for the person who gave up their life. But outsiders didn't understand how it was resolved. And they petitioned to Congress, and they said, Indian nations are not handling these the right way. So we should pass a law that says that these crimes like murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, maiming, sexual abuse, rape, felony assault, which is child sexual assault, incest, assault against an individual who hasn't reached the age of 16, felony child abuse or neglect, arson, burglary, robbery, and felony under Section 661. You have to look it up under United States Code. Those crimes which are committed by an Indian against an Indian or a non-Indian should be prosecuted federally, so that we can impose strict penalties against them, put them in jail, instead of it being handled by the tribe under their traditional way. So how do we determine who has criminal jurisdiction in Indian country and outside of Indian country? You have to look at where the crime was committed, as I talked about earlier. You have to look at the race of the perpetrator, the person who has been accused of committing the crime. You have to look at the race of the victim. Is the victim an Indian or non-Indian? You have to look at, are there any applicable federal statutes regarding that kind of crime that happened in Indian country? Then you have to look at, are there any Supreme Court cases that may apply? And then you also have to look at, are there any federal statutes of general applicability that apply? We would wish that it would be easier to determine who has criminal jurisdiction in Indian country, but it's not always that easy. It is a lot easier in the state because you can look at state laws, but that's being kind of changed because of a Supreme Court that came up recently over this past summer. Then we also have to look at federal law and definitions, because a federal law talks about Indians, and who is an Indian? Lots of us define ourselves according to where we come from. For example, I'm Kiwame, meaning I come from Kiwa. But it's going to under federal law, we are defined as being an Indian if we're a member of any Indian tribe, if we're eligible to become a member of an Indian tribe, or if we own land in trust, or we have a restricted interest in land. And any person who meets the definition of Indian under the Indian Reorganization Act and under the regulations of that act. And we also, as I stated, laws changed as the United States changed and became formed as the United States, and people moved west. And when they encountered tribes in California, they added another definition. So they talked about Indians are those who have inheritance and ownership of trust lands or restricted lands in the state of California, pursuant to section 2206 of this title of the United States Code. And any persons described in that paragraph and people who own that trust or restricted in interest in that parcel of land in the state of California. Isn't that interesting how the definitions changed as, well, I think that's true with most laws. They are put in place, but they're not always put in place to stay there forever. They're put in place so that we can make changes. They're supposed to be living documents that we can make changes to as things change throughout our lives. So, another review about how we determine jurisdiction according to crimes committed in Indian countries by people, by parties. When I say parties, I'm talking about plaintiff and defendant in criminal, because they're named that way. So if there's a crime committed by an Indian against an Indian, it's considered an enumerated major crime, and it's prosecuted in federal court. But some tribes are also now putting in their codes crimes of sexual assault that can be prosecuted in their tribal court. So they can be prosecuted in tribal court and in federal court. So it's concurrent jurisdiction, meaning they can be prosecuted in both places. But usually they're prosecuted federally. And when a crime is committed by an Indian against an Indian and it's not a major crime, then it is prosecuted by that tribe exclusively. If it's a crime committed by an Indian against a non-Indian and it's an enumerated major crime, as I stated before, it can be prosecuted federally or tribally. If it's a crime committed by an Indian against a non-Indian and it's not a major crime, then it's prosecuted federally or tribally. if it's a crime committed by a non-Indian against an Indian. Now, this is where a change has taken place because of the recent Supreme Court case. It can be prosecuted, and it used to be just federally, but now some states are assuming jurisdiction. And mainly, I would say in Oklahoma, this is where the biggest impact is happening and may happen, is that some states are saying that they will prosecute crimes committed by a non-Indian against an Indian. I blank on the case name. It was a case responding to a Supreme Court case that had said that Indian country was expanded in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma protested, and they wanted to say that they still have jurisdiction over a lot of these crimes that are being committed within what they're saying their boundaries. And unfortunately, Justice Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, and there's still in Indian country, people are looking at how are we going to respond to this Supreme Court decision, because he wrongfully states, and this is my perspective, I'm saying that, and one of the justices also stated in his dissent that he'd said that Indian reservations are considered part of states. And when I talked to you earlier about the definition of Indian country, it doesn't state that in federal law. So there's going to be a lot of clarification taking place about that. And then crimes committed by a non-Indian against a non-Indian are prosecuted in state or county courts. Now, when we look at, earlier I stated that tribes don't have criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. Under the Violence Against Women Act, we've made inroads to being able to allowing and permitting Indian nations to prosecute non-Indians who commit crimes in Indian country. But there are limits to the types of crimes that may be prosecuted in tribal court for criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. And there are also things that Indian nations have to put in place to be able to have those kind of cases come into their tribal courts. This started in 2013 when some tribes were allowed to, in their courts, to have special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction. And in 2013, there were, for now, at this point, there are 31 tribes that have been exercising what we call special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians who committed crimes of domestic violence or mainly domestic violence over non-Indians. That has been expanded so that tribes now are able to have special tribal criminal jurisdiction over the crimes of dating violence, domestic violence, violation of protection orders, sexual violence, stalking, sex trafficking, child violence, obstruction of justice, and assaults against justice personnel. This is new. It changed the definition, also changed the definition and expanded the definition of domestic violence to any violation of the criminal law of that Indian tribe that has jurisdiction over Indian country, where the violation occurred that is committed by a current or former spouse or intimate partner of the victim, a person with whom the victim shares a child in common, a person who is cohabitating with or who has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse or intimate partner, or a person similarly situated to a spouse, similar to a spouse of the victim under the domestic or family violence laws of that Indian tribe that has jurisdiction over the Indian country where the violation occurs. Isn't that interesting? Where it did expand it because it had a narrower definition of domestic violence under the law in 2013, but now this is the definition. And then there's definitions over criminal conduct and the participating tribe. And it says participating tribe because earlier I stated tribes have to meet certain conditions before they can prosecute, before non-Indians can be prosecuted in their tribal courts. And the definition of obstruction of justice means any violation of the criminal laws of that Indian tribe that has that jurisdiction over the Indian country where the violation occurs. Was the crime committed in that Indian country within that jurisdiction of that Indian tribe? That involves interfering with the administration or due process of the laws of the Indian tribe, including any tribal criminal proceeding or investigation of a crime. So this means maybe their code provides that obstruction of justice means that a non-Indian is not following what the law enforcement officer is telling them to do, or the tribal official, if they don't have a law enforcement officer, is telling the non-Indian to do. And it is defined under the tribal code. That's an example. Then sex trafficking is defined. It means conduct within the meaning of section 1591A of Title 18 United States Code. So you would have to look that up by going to that title and looking up that section. Sexual violence means any non-consensual sexual act or contact proscribed by the criminal law of the Indian tribe that has jurisdiction over the Indian country where the violation occurs, including in any case in which the victim lacks the capacity to consent to the act. Because of this definition, so I would see that tribes now are going to have to look at their codes. And if they have this crime of sexual violence, then they may have to amend their code to make sure it mirrors this definition so that it can be prosecuted in their tribal court. Stalking means engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person proscribed by the criminal law of the Indian tribe that has jurisdiction over the Indian country where the violation occurs, that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their life, their safety, or the safety of others, or to suffer substantial emotional distress. So again, tribes would need to look at what their definition of stalking is, or do they even have it in their code, to put this in their code so that they can, non-Indians who commit this crime can be prosecuted in tribal court. Violation of a protection order means an act that occurs in an Indian country of that participating tribe and who violates the provision of that protection order that prohibits or provides protection against a violent or threatening acts or harassment against or sexual violence against, contact or communication with, or physical proximity to, like they were told to stay away from the person who has the protection order, and they come within, maybe they were supposed to stay 50 yards away, they come within that distance, that would be a violation. Or was issued against the defendant, maybe there's a no contact order, or is enforceable by the participating tribe and is consistent with section 2265 of Title 18 of the United States Code. And I'm going to share that with you further on. So that is how they define violation of a protection order. A tribe, as I stated, to be a participating tribe, that tribe has to provide trial by an impartial jury drawn by a fair cross-section of the community that does not systematically exclude any distinctive group in the community, including non-Indians. So this has created a lot and this is the same definition that was put in place in 2013. Now there are 570, it may be 72 or 574 federally recognized tribes across the country. And earlier I stated only 31 tribes are prosecuting non-Indians in their tribal courts. This is a definition that remains in place. Some tribes, it has been a hardship to change their codes, takes a long process to change codes. And maybe their jury rules don't say that they include people that some tribes already, maybe they have non-Indians that live in their communities, or maybe they have non-Indians who work. A lot of tribes have casinos. They have a large population of people that come and work within their tribal boundaries. So some tribes can draw their jury pools from employees of the tribe who are non-Indians. So tribes have had to really look at what is a jury, who makes up the jury pool. Tribal court must also provide defense counsel. Lots of tribes don't have the resources to employ. They are barely getting by with federal funding to employ a judge, to employ court clerks, and to sometimes have probation officers. Some places don't have funds to hire defense counsel. So to be a participating tribe, they have to hire and provide defense counsel. They also have to have published their laws and rules. The judge has to have sufficient legal training, be licensed to practice law in any jurisdiction in the United States. So for Navajo Nation, if they're licensed to practice law on the Navajo Nation, that would be an example, then the judge has that sufficient legal training. And the tribe has to record their hearings. So some tribes don't have that in place. They don't have the ability to record hearings, but most tribes are moving in that direction. And then some tribes don't, like I stated earlier, for some of the pueblos in New Mexico that don't have written codes, maybe they're not recording their hearings. And maybe they're in the process of moving in that direction, or maybe they've decided that they don't want to do this. They don't want to be a participating tribe because they don't have issues of many non-Indians committing crimes that were listed on the previous slide. So maybe they're going to decide they don't want to be and exercise this special tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians. And then the tribe also has to have a tribal bar association. Now, not many tribes have that in place. So some tribes are working on it. Funding is coming through under the Department of Justice, and Congress has allocated funding, but it's a long process of being able to put everything in place to be this participating tribe. So how do you get a protection order when you're in a tribal jurisdiction? Some of the questions that come up are similar to come up in when you're working with someone who wants a protection order in a state court. You look at the procedures. You look at the definitions. Is it called a protection order? Is it called an order of protection? How is it defined? You look at the laws of the tribe. You get to know the court clerk. You look to see, does this tribe have their laws on a website that you can look it up? If they don't, do they have it in their library? Where can you look to see to get a copy of the procedures and the laws? Who can file one? Now this is going to vary. For example, on Navajo Nation, the victim can file. If a family member, if they see that somebody needs a protection order, they can file on behalf of their family member. And it'll state specifically in the code and under state law, as advocates who work in state court and help people outside of Indian reservations, outside of Indian country, it specifically says in the state law who can file. So it's important to get to know the laws of that court, because the laws will provide that direction about who can file and how you can file. So going to court, when you're helping somebody and you're preparing them to go to court, in tribal court, and even filing it itself, you look to see, is there a filing fee? Most tribes don't charge a filing fee for a filing to request a protection order. But if they do, is there a process requesting waiver of that filing fee? And if it doesn't state specifically in their law, it's helpful to just ask the court, because most courts have, even if it isn't written in their procedures, they have a process where you can ask the court and say, can the filing fee be waived because this person doesn't have any funds to pay for the filing fee? I'm going to say she, because in most cases, it's a she who's requesting this. She's suffering a financial hardship because she had to move away from home. She doesn't have the resources, and she really needs protection right now. The court also can tell you how many copies need to be filed. They can also give you an idea how long it will take to get an order of protection, or a protection order, or a restraining order. And then they can also tell you how long it will take before the hearing is held. This information is where I stated earlier, to get to know the court clerk. The court clerks can't give legal advice. Courts can't give legal advice, the personnel at the court, but they can give this kind of information. Now, once a person gets a protection order, how is it enforced? Now, in 1994, because people were getting protection orders and they were wondering, well, how do I get this enforced? And this was about the same time as the Violence Against Women Act went into place. And people were looking at how do we, and advocates especially, were looking at minimizing re-victimization of people who need protection. So the full faith and credit was enacted, which basically says that any protection order that's issued consistent with this section of the law by the court of a state or an Indian tribe, they are called the issuing state or Indian tribe. It's given full faith and credit by the court of another state or Indian tribe, who becomes the enforcing state or Indian tribe. And it's enforced as if it were the order of the enforcing state or Indian tribe. Now, this was enacted in 1994. We still have issues of enforcement, and this means that we still have to do a lot of training and a lot of create awareness, especially for law enforcement officers, not only within Indian country, but also throughout the state. I've gone to meetings with judges, state court judges, and they have identified this as an ongoing issue. Before this was put in place, if you had a protection order, some courts would say, you have to take your protection order and get it registered in our court, or you have to get another protection order in our court, which means that the person getting the protection order would have to go through court, would have to testify again, would oftentimes have to face the person they want protection from. And that is re-victimization of the person who needs the protection. So full faith and credit, as I stated, was put in place so they didn't have to go through that process. They'll have to go to one hearing, present their reasons why they need the protection one time, face the respondent one time, and then be able to have their protection order enforced anywhere, all across the nation, all across the United States, all across any territories of the United States. And so that, and all across Indian country as well. So the definition of protection orders, which has been changed, and I'm gonna share that, started out with a protection order specifically has to say that the court has jurisdiction over the parties, over the petitioner and the respondent, or if they're called plaintiff and defendant. It also has to say that the court found that they have subject matter jurisdiction. So I talked about that earlier. So the court has to specifically say that in the protection order that they issue. The protection order also has to say that there was due process given to the respondent, the person who the protection order was filed against, which means that it has to say that the person was provided notice, meaning that the person was served with the petition for protection order and was given the opportunity to be heard, so that the person who the protection order was filed against, they have the opportunity to be heard. So the notice is, for example, in a protection order, it will say, you have the opportunity to be heard, to come to this hearing on this date and this time. You also have the opportunity to file something, if you want to file something with the court. So you have that right to due process. So in the case of ex parte orders, those are emergency orders where somebody wants to get a protection order immediately, and they've provided enough information to the court stating why there's an emergency, why they need to have this protection in place immediately. Then the court can issue what is called an ex parte order, meaning it's one-sided, one party, they've heard one side's case. But there has to be a reasonable time after the ex parte order is issued by the court to give the respondent due process. So usually the time frame is short. When an ex parte order is issued by a court, then the time frame, sometimes it's stated in the code, maybe 14 days, maybe 10 days, but this is where the crucial time period of, and when you're helping people to fill out a petition, it's real important to ensure that information is provided in the petition to show where the respondent can be found for service of process. So if the petitioner doesn't know where the respondent is, then you have to look at the law of the court of that tribe. Does the court say that it can be published in a newspaper? Does the court say that notice can be published at the person's residence? Does the code say that it has to be personally delivered? And who has to personally deliver the order of protection and the petition. So all of those things have to be ensured. So when you're helping somebody to get a order of protection, it's so important to look at the laws of that jurisdiction, because the respondent can say, I wasn't provided my due process rights. I wasn't given the notice. I wasn't given the opportunity, and this order of protection should be dismissed. Now, this also means that sometimes when person who's requesting a protection order, they don't understand this. They go to court, and if they don't have a legal advocate, or if they're not represented by an attorney, they may not know and understand all of this. So when I was with legal services on Navajo Nation, one way we countered that argument, but because I was an attorney and I was there with the victim who was requesting the protection order, the person came to court, the respondent, and he said, I didn't get my notice. I didn't get a copy of the petition. So he's there in court. So all I had to do was ask him, well, how did you know there was a hearing today? Then he testifies, my mother told me that I had a hearing, told me that it was at this time. You didn't get a copy of the petition. Okay, Judge, can we ask, I'd like to ask for a recess for 5 minutes, and I'd like to give the respondent a copy of the petition so that he has an opportunity to review it. And that way he knows what was filed against him, and then he has time to respond. And then sometimes courts will allow time, and they will extend the ex parte order and give the respondent time. Sometimes respondents say, well, I just got this paper and I want to look at it, and I want to have an attorney look at it. So then the judge will sometimes give that time and will set another hearing. So some of these things, sometimes people don't understand that it's just asking the court and asking the judge and making those requests. Now, protection orders that are not given full faith and credit we were seeing some courts giving mutual protection orders. Now, they're not called mutual protection orders, or they could be titled that, but for a mutual protection order to be given full faith and credit, the respondent has to have filed a cross or counter petition. And the court has to make specific findings that the other party is entitled to protection or to protection. If there's no cross or counter petition or complaint or other written pleading was filed seeking protection, if the respondent didn't file anything like that, and the court didn't make specific findings that the respondent is entitled to protection, then they issue a mutual protection order, that mutual protection order is not given full faith and credit. Now, this was put in place because when we were seeing also respondents were saying, and they do this also when they come to court, they say, well, she this did against me. And I'm afraid of her, or she did this against me, so I should be protected as well. So if nothing has been filed with the court and the court still goes ahead and allows a protection order against the petitioner, that order is not given full faith and credit. This is put in place so that victims, those who are seeking protection, are not re-victimized. Because we were also seeing that respondents were using protection orders, if mutual protection orders, saying she violated it. she called me, she contacted me, or she did this and this, and she violated, she should be arrested. So there were all of these different things put in place in federal law to ensure the safety of those who were getting protection orders or orders of protection. And as I stated earlier, the so many issues have come up regarding full faith and credit. And in 2013, when I think it was in 2013, or it might have been, but I'm pretty sure it was 2013, the advocates went back to Congress and asked to have more wording put in, because even though full faith and credit was in place, people were still not understanding this. So this clarifies and specifically says, even though it says in the other provision, a court of an Indian tribe shall have full civil jurisdiction to issue and enforce protection orders involving any person, including the authority to enforce any orders through civil contempt proceedings. They can exclude violators from Indian land and use other appropriate mechanism in matters arising anywhere within Indian country of that Indian tribe or otherwise within the authority of that Indian tribe. So there were a lot of challenges by, I would say, non-Indians challenging civil jurisdiction. Maybe some a Native woman or Native man gets a protection order and they want it enforced, and they take it to tribal court and for enforcement, and the law enforcement they refer it to tribal court. They refer the person to tribal court. Tribal court can hold the person in contempt of court and impose a fine. They can also say you are excluded from being within the boundaries of our Indian nation. So that violation also has to have happened within Indian country. So this was a new definition that came in place because of challenges to full faith and credit. And then the definition of protection order has also been expanded. And I think this also took place in 2013. It was expanded and now includes any injunction or other order issued by a court for the purpose of preventing violent or threatening acts or harassment against, or contact or communication with, or physical proximity to another person, including any temporary or final order issued by a civil or criminal court. Earlier, I said no contact orders. Those are also included as a protection order, whether obtained by filing an independent action, as so long as that civil or criminal order was issued in response to a complaint, a petition, or motion filed by or on behalf of the person seeking protection. And a motion can be filed in any child support case, child custody or visitation provision, an order in another case, a remedy or relief issued as part of a protection order, a restraining order, or injunction pursuant to a state, tribal, territorial, or local law authorizing the issuance of protection orders. So it expanded it, as you can see, the definition, and it includes restraining orders or injunctions for the protection of victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, or stalking. And it has to be an independent action as long as that civil or criminal order was issued in response and on behalf of that person seeking protection. And as I stated earlier, oh, looks like I guess I repeated it. Okay. Now we're getting close to the last half hour, and I'm going to make sure we have time for questions and discussion. Now, I don't know all of the resources. So this is dependent on you and what kind of resources, and they're going to vary. And I put down there, I wanted to make sure that there's an understanding that Native domestic violence are citizens of the state, as well as members of their Indian nations, and are also United States citizens. So resources, you would say that resources, it appears to be unlimited, but they're not always unlimited. In tribal nations, sometimes they don't have a lot of resources that someone can access outside of their boundaries. Most Indian nations don't have shelters, but they may have a domestic violence program or a social services program that they are able to work with victims of domestic violence to get them to a safe home, to help them to get a protection order, to sometimes they have access to funds where they can help a person be able to stay in a off reservation location that is usually kept confidential. Maybe they can stay in a hotel for a time frame, or maybe they have connections with a safe home. For example, we know that you all know because you are the resources off reservation. I think the only shelters in place, and maybe this has changed, that I know of are there's one at Zuni, there's one at Laguna, Zuni and Laguna, Navajo Nation, Shiprock. I don't know if it's operational now. There was one. I don't know if there's one at Crown Point, and I'm not sure about Rama or Tohajili. Oh, and I forgot when I read that map. I forgot it didn't show there's another part of Navajo Nations in the southern part. Somebody can help me with that in the chat. I forgot the name of it. In the southern part of the state of Navajo Nation. So looking at resources, they can be limited and they can vary about who provides those resources. And this is where I would say we depend on each other, especially through the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the partnership with the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. Those partnerships are very important to be established so that we can call on each other to seek information about where victims of domestic violence can get help, where they can access safety, where they can get information, and also ensuring that their information is kept confidential. This means that we really need to have good communication with each other and be able to look past the boundaries that I talked about, especially the jurisdictional issues, and call on each other. So I'm gonna look at the chat now. Yes, thank you. Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta, that's the recent Supreme Court case where it did talk about the issues around state jurisdiction over non-Indians committing crimes in Indian country. Now, there are conversations taking place I want to share with you about how to address that in New Mexico, because New Mexico is different than Oklahoma. And the definition of Indian country in Oklahoma has changed recently because of a prior case. And pretty much in Indian country here in New Mexico, And this is what we heard from an assistant U.S. attorney. Some of you may know him, Kyle Naback. He did a presentation for the tribal and state judges recently at our quarterly meeting. He said that he thinks that this isn't going to be an issue in New Mexico because resources are so limited for states as well as with tribes. He doesn't see where where state authorities are going to be wanting to prosecute and prosecute non-Indians who commit crimes in Indian country, whether they're going to want to take those cases. Because right now those are prosecuted in federal court. And he sees that that's going to continue. But we shall see as we move down the road. And then there are some exclusions. There was a meeting that happened recently with the Pueblo governors with several state, tribal attorneys. Yes, Alamo, thank you. In the southern part of the state, and they're part of the Navajo Nation. So with this law being put in place, the questions come up with, are we exempted from that state Supreme Court decision? Our definition of Indian country for Pueblos is different than what the definition is for Indian country in Oklahoma. So, but then some people are also now looking at, are we going to have to go to Congress to clarify all of this, to clarify the definition of Indian country? Are we going to have to make sure that protections remain in place and that our jurisdictional boundaries remain in place, especially for tribes under federal law being considered domestic sovereign nations and having our own laws in place? So this has brought up a whole lot of questions. Let's see. So, do we have any questions? We've got about maybe a little more, about 15 minutes to go. Maybe, I don't know if Teresa can unmute. If somebody wants to ask a question she can maybe raise your hand and she can unmute you. And then we can go that way, or else you can put it into the chat.
Yes, you all are welcome to unmute and ask your questions, or you can place them in the chat.
I have a question.
Okay.
So I am new here at Nombre Pueblo. I just started as of last week, and I'm the outreach coordinator here.
Good. We're gonna have to meet with you soon.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm just, since I'm new to the area and everything like that, I mean, it's such a beautiful community. However, if you guys have any ideas of campaigning and doing a lot of outreach programs in a way to where I can get familiar with and start implementing that here in the community. I know that, the whole COVID thing that we it's starting over now. The programs are restarting. So I think even just being able to show awareness of domestic violence or any kind of crimes within the community and how to expand on the resources that are available within the community, either it's internal or external services that can serve these families. So if anybody has any ideas on campaigning, outreach, pamphlets, I'm open to any suggestions or ideas.
Okay. I love outreach because it means that you're making your presence known in the community and setting up tables. And like you stated, some restrictions have opened up for some pueblos, and some are still in place. Some places there's still mask mandates, but meetings are being held and people are able to come to meetings in spaces now. And what we've seen is with the coalition, if you ask them, they will come and they'll do outreach. They'll work with you, the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, as well as the state coalition. And then also the Sexual Assault Coalition. There's been a lot of partnerships and collaborations established. And with the Northern Pueblos, especially, and in Nambe, especially, there's checkerboarding.
Right.
There's areas where it's not well defined where the boundaries are. There's some places where some land is owned by non-Indians and some land where it is Indian country. So some of those questions come up, and when cases are filed in court, I guess I didn't share with you also that I'm the chief judge at Nambe. So
Wow.
so I know you're new. So with those questions come up about Indian country, we always have to look at jurisdiction. And do we have jurisdiction, as I shared earlier? But outreach is really important. The more information that we can get to people in our communities, whether they're in Indian country or outside Indian country, or especially in the communities outside Indian country, it's real important to do those outreach events. And not just, I always say, why do we just focus them all around Domestic Violence Awareness Month? I think they should be throughout the year. We do focus a lot in October because it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. For me, because I've done this work for years around ending violence against Native women, for me, it's all the time. I don't want, and the education and creating awareness is ongoing for law enforcement officers, for advocates, for anyone in the community, that we get information out there all the time, because protection and safety is always needed every day. And what we saw because of COVID, and maybe some of you have experienced this, and I think because of COVID, part of it, people being confined, people having to not have access to resources that are readily available. We've seen an increase in the numbers of domestic violence cases being filed in Indian country, and not just in New Mexico. I work with tribal court judges across the country. We've seen an increase in domestic violence crimes being committed. And maybe it's just the whole atmosphere across the nation with a lot of people showing their true natures and feeling like they can get away with committing crimes, and violence, unfortunately, is happening not only in our communities, but all across the nation, so that people are feeling like they can get away with things. So maybe that's part of it, but we don't know, but we've seen that increase. So because of that, it's so important for us to do that outreach and to be there and let people know that who they can come to, where they can get support, where they can access the resources that are available to them. Did that help?
Yeah, and I can also piggyback off of that too. And as Peggy, honorable now, honorable Bird, she mentioned that we would be happy to support you. So we do have Rochelle, who is our communications person. She does a lot of our social media campaigns, and also the Tribal Coalition is fantastic at doing social media campaigns. They have Curtis there, who's amazing, that you can also reach out. And it's so nice to meet you, by the way. Nambe is one of our membership organizations, so please reach out to us on how we can support. But just as she mentioned, it's really important to go out and just attend as many events as you can within your community. If there's a coffee and talk, something that's happening with your community, just go and introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm part of this organization. This is what we do. How can we support? And just start showing your face at all of those events, so they can now get to know you, and then they'll get to know the program, and they'll have a direct contact. And also, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it's a great opportunity for you to reach out to your city council, to your commissioners, to everybody, and do a proclamation. That's really also a good way to get your face known in the community. for the organization. So there's a lot of different opportunities in outreach. As you mentioned, we are starting to get back out there, right? Little by little, but I'm really passionate about outreach and attending events like that. So please feel free to reach out.
And that's not only just outreach in our tribal communities, outreach outside as well.
Yes,
Mhm.
everywhere.
There's so many events happening and those opportunities are there. Maybe somebody is sponsoring, like I know it's in Santa Fe, they have they have all kinds of events happening. Ask the sponsors, can you set up a table? Can you be there to give information? There's so many things happening now. Flea markets, feast days
Mhm.
at the communities. What Navajo Nation, they have their fairs. Set up a booth at their fair. The coalition has been great about doing this. They attend all kinds of conferences. I was at the Four Corners Indian Country Conference. It was in Phoenix. They had a table there. So did the Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition. They had a table there.
Mhm.
Then there were also advocates from their state coalition, Arizona coalition. So when there are things like that happening, ask the sponsors if you can provide a table. Oh, there's an event that's happening this next week. I don't know, maybe there's still time to even contact Tribal Law and Policy. And maybe the coalition has done this, but they're looking at tribal healing to wellness courts. I mean, those are opportunities where you're going to have people who are working with each other and you can get information out. So just all of those different things happen and you can be there. Anyone else?
Hi, Teresa. This is Gailey Martinez, Honorable Bird. I'm from Taos, and right now I work for CAV, and which is in the town of Taos. And we work with a lot of Native women, and I guess what I would say is that working with the district attorneys and then having to work with the tribe because we have our Native families with living within the city, well, the town and the county. A lot of the times, cases will go into district court as well, of course, like for the protection orders and whatnot. And so, of course, we have Taos Pueblo, which is right across the cattle guard. And so right now it's just we don't have an attorney on staff. So it's really trying, having to deal with the protection orders, child custody, and all of that. And so I guess my question is just that, like with child custody, I guess tribal courts have precedence over Native children, and that would go to tribal court. Is that my understanding?
So according to their code, you'd have to look at their code. What does their
Okay.
code say? Do they have jurisdiction over? So for example, I showed you a part of the Hamas code
Mhm.
and it shows it's set specifically over custody or over people who may have issues that arise within the boundaries of Hamas. Same thing would be with Taos.
Okay.
Whether,
All
and
right.
maybe
So
it
if
also
there were,
says, are they a member? Or are they
Mhm.
eligible to be a member? So those
Okay.
are things that the court would decide.
Okay. So if there's already something stipulated in the protection order, I guess they can still take that to tribal court if they wanted to, correct?
Yeah. And then, with that change in the definition of protection orders,
Mhm.
we were seeing that some people were getting protection orders and then the state court would not address custody.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's still going on because states, I think in New Mexico, when I saw those, that they weren't addressing custody and they were referring people back to go to get that established if they lived on the reservation.
Yeah, and this one in particular was addressed. It was filed in district court, being that this the family lives in the town of Taos. So it was addressed in district court. It was also stipulated in the protection order, part of the custody, but the other party is still wanting to file in tribal court. So that's kind of confusing for me too. And I'm just like, oh my God, what do I do? We don't have an attorney. There's conflict. We've reached out to New Mexico Legal Aid. There's conflict because one party has already contacted them. So by the time we get through, it's just like there's the conflict. So it's just like we're just kind of coming upon
Okay. So
hitting
the
a brick
state
wall.
bar,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. The State Bar of New Mexico, you can go to their website. I think it's NM Bar. And they have an area where people can find an attorney, and their attorneys across the state, if you're a member of the state bar, you have to do a certain number of pro bono hours. That means you don't charge. So you can also see if anyone is available to do pro bono work. And there are some attorneys who will do that. That will do some a limited amount of pro bono work because they have to meet the number of hours. So that's
Okay, yeah,
sort of,
and so we've done that because they
oh, it
do
didn't work
have
either.
here in Taos, we've
Uh,
had her file for that. I'm just trying to find everything that I can. So we've already done
yeah,
that. And but I will definitely reach out to the state bar, and thank you for that information.
sure.
It's been very helpful.
Any more questions?
All right. Looks like there's no more questions, but as you all know, I will be sending you an email in a couple of days as soon as we get this recording on our YouTube channel. I will send you the link. I will send you Honorable Dr. Peggy Bird's information so you can contact her. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I put my email address up there.
perfect. Awesome. So I will send that over to you guys, and I will also send the PowerPoint just in case if you all would like to look at it, and the recording link, and of course your survey to receive your certificate. Let me know if you all have any questions, and again, you can contact Dr. Honorable Peggy Bird if you all have any questions as well. And please let us know if you all need any other support as well after this training. We are happy to provide that. And thank you so much, Dr. Honorable Peggy Bird, for being here with us. This was a fantastic training. This is a training that was really asked for from our programs to really learn more, right? There's always a lot of updates that are happening, and it's nice to touch base and retouch on this subject. So thank you so much for being here with us. And we really thank the Tribal Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women for all of their support. So thank you.
You're welcome. And my thanks to all of you for being with me this morning. Blessings to all of you. This is a view looking west from my mom's house at Kiwa. You see the mountains, you see the fields, and you see the trees and the sky. And as I stated earlier, I'm Sun Clan. So the sky and looking up and seeing all that. As you see my background, it's in my background too. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.